Welcome to the group chat with Tara Thomas and Amanda Goodman of Faith and Four Letter Words.
That was a faulty open. I don't know what happened. A little glitch there in the open, and it's a little late on this Wednesday morning. It's 5 minutes after the hour. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tara Thomas. It's 7:05 on your Wednesday. I am soloing once again. Amanda had a work commitment, so we've been apart for a while. So we talked yesterday after not connecting for a few days since we've both been going in opposite directions, and we both agreed that we missed talking to one another as regularly as we do. And of course, we enjoy the conversation and engagement with the group chat. So we will be reunited soon, like peaches and herb, as they say. The whole week has been crazy schedule wise for both of us. So she's obviously back at work after all the soccer fun and all the things that happened last week. If you missed the headline, her daughter Gia and their Hudson soccer team won the school's first ever girls state championship for that school. And it was so neat because Gia, I didn't even mention this on Monday morning, Gia made the all tournament team and she was named the captain. So that was like the cherry on top. So she could not have had a more storybook ending to her high school career. So we're so happy for Gia and family. And of course, very incredible accomplishment for those girls to make it to state 4 years in a row and then to seal the deal, so to speak, with a win on Saturday to secure that state championship over a team that was also really good. Denver, it was the third time Iowa had been back in the state championship for that Class 1A girls competition. So very cool for a lot of Eastern Iowa, really accomplished soccer players on the girls' side to make it to the state tournament. AP, Applington Parkersburg, also was among the state finalists. And so it's kind of crazy. You drive all the way to the Des Moines area for state, and then you're playing the teams that you already play in your regular conference competitions. So that's kind of a good thing, right? That means you're coming out of a strong conference. And in other sports news, my son and his West High baseball team are having a much better season than I think anyone anticipated. They're at about 500. 10-10 is their record. And those of you who know the sport of baseball will know that being at 500 is a huge achievement because a lot of major league teams don't peak at 500 or reach that. So it's an exciting time for both of us because we have kids that are heavily involved in varsity sports. So I was at the ballpark last night. We had a game against East, and that's our crosstown rival. Always so fun when East and West play because they have a rich tradition, and this is kind of the end, the swan song, the end for East and West, because in the next couple of years, the sports and then the schools are going to combine into one high school. So the Waterloo United School will be one of the largest high schools in the state. And my son will be graduating next year. So he will not be a part of the conjoined high school. But years ago, we always said that we would have loved our children to be a part of a combined school because a lot of advantages with all the classes being under one roof. And then, of course, for sports, the more people you have, the more students, the more competitive you can be. So the downside of it, though, is when there are only 5 spots on a basketball court and you have such a huge high school, that limits the opportunities of, how many kids will get to play. And so there's definitely trade-offs. But the Waterloo United plan is already in motion. They're combining some of the sports already this year and then for the upcoming school year as well. But like I said, my son will be not part of the new high school. So he will graduate as I believe the last class or second to last class at Waterloo West before they combine. So interesting times for a lot of schools. The consolidation has been happening for years in the rural districts, and now we're seeing a lot of it in some of the larger districts. And part of that is understandably the population shift. Right now, there just aren't as many people moving in to Eastern Iowa. And then when you look at the numbers, some of these incoming kindergarten classes are a lot smaller than, previous years. And if you're involved in the higher ed world, if you work at a college or you're following trends, then you also know that there is this huge enrollment decline that's happening as we head into the coming years for higher ed. They call it the enrollment cliff, where they knew that combination of the COVID years and the way that the model changed, the delivery model changed, where a lot of people can take virtual or online courses, or they're doing the trade schools and shorter degrees. It's completely upended that traditional model of everybody, if you're college bound, going to a 4-year in-person institution. Now you have so many people that are doing obviously the virtual engagement, and then some people understandably going the more inexpensive route of like a community college and then finishing their degrees at a 4-year institution. So talking to people I know who are a part of the higher ed world, there have been so many changes and cuts, and then projected loss of enrollment, which translates to a depletion in funds. So those of you right now who have a junior in high school or even a senior, you probably know firsthand, as I do, that our inboxes and our mailboxes are inundated with mail from colleges. So I would say my son, who's a junior, we probably get 15 to 20 emails a week from colleges, probably more than that, wanting him to apply or come visit, or they're going to waive the application fee, all the things. And then if you look in your mailbox, you've got at least 10 pieces of mail a week coming, which unfortunately is actually kind of a waste at this point, because my son at 17 never sees the mail, doesn't get the mail from the mailbox. And then when his dad or I get it, 99% of the time we just toss it in the recycle bin, because at this point he most likely wants to go to Iowa, or he's not really looking seriously at any other colleges. And so I think that's what's interesting, is I'd be curious what the return on investment is, the ROI on all that mail, because I don't know that a lot of kids even look at it. Now, back in my day, in the 1900s, a Gen Xer, getting mail from colleges was a big deal. And so I remember the first mailing, or the first, I think it was either a postcard or a brochure that I got, was from New York University. And I had planned to go to college out east and ended up doing so. And so for me, getting that mail was like a big deal. It was like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood when Mr. McFeely comes to the door with your mail. I coveted that mail, because back then we didn't have the internet. We didn't have digital ways to engage. So I had a grocery sack back in the day at our Kroger's and Haddad's. We used to have grocery sacks, and I had a grocery sack full of all the college mail that I received. And I was proud of all the mail and all the different schools and the interest in me, because back in the 90s, we took that very sincerely. Now, junk mail and email and spam is such a common thing that kids today don't even read the emails, right? Whereas when we were young, it was a big deal if somebody put our name on something and sent it through the traditional mail route. So yeah, that whole bag, that sack of college mail I had kept in my bedroom for quite some time. And I ended up going to college out east to Boston University. And so that was so fun, because I always said, I was fortunate that I wasn't the kind of kid who got homesick, but I also had very supportive parents who said, we're going to help you follow your dreams. And so we support wherever you want to go. So when I ended up going out there, then it was just interesting being, halfway across the country to the east. And then our daughter, Charlotte, she similarly was open to going out of state and now is in Arizona. And so I was proud of her, just knowing what it felt like in those formative years of my life, having that big wide world of possibilities. And so when I did go far away, it definitely has the effect of making you appreciate all the things about home that you take for granted. And so then I obviously ended up coming back to the Midwest in my 20s and then being here to raise my kids in Iowa. So it all kind of came full circle. And for my parents, it was nice because after living on both coasts for college and then the early years of my career when I was in Washington State, it was nice when I moved back to the Midwest, even though 3 hours over in Iowa back in 2002. And Amanda and I talk about it all the time. I mean, we moved here for a job and it had nothing to do with our spouse or our children. And then we ended up either bringing kids or having kids in Iowa. And so when we were young, we had no concept of where or how the career and family would play out. But it is funny that she and I both, being transplants, ended up sticking and staying here because we were already, embedded or planted here, if you will. And so it made sense when we were then married and ready to have children that we stayed because we wanted to give our children the same kind of foundation that we had, where we stayed in the same community through, all those years of schooling. So for me, I was the same house and the same neighborhood and the same friends pretty much, from birth to graduation. And then for my kids, we lived in Cedar Falls. And then when Charlotte was going into third grade, we moved back to Waterloo, where I had originally lived when I came here as a single person. And then we stayed here and moved into the house actually that we're in today in 2014. And then Amanda, she and her family relocated from Cedar Falls to Hudson because of her husband's job. And then they stayed, and that's where Gia now graduated from. So for those of you who were, going to preschool all the way through 12th grade with the same kids, that is a unique experience and in some ways rare because nowadays, we're just a more transient population. So a lot of times people do have to move for work. And then sometimes obviously the kids are a part of that. And so if you're able to stay in the same place and keep your kids in the same schools and the same friend group, it is nice for them to have that stability. But I think they do okay if they have to have the challenge of meeting and moving with new friend groups and new classmates too. So I think there's definitely pros and cons to both, because once they go to college, then they're thrust sometimes into a world where it's completely foreign to them if they've never been around strangers or people that weren't raised, in the same town with all the same people. So I think for kids that go to college, if you branch out and make new friends, you can really have opportunities then to comfortably immerse yourself into the working world that will come, where you're going to have the challenges of not, knowing everybody and their parents don't know your parents. And so you really have to make your own way and forge your own path. So if you are a fan of the Faith in Four Letter Words tour and you have not had the chance to see us in person, or you'd love to come to another show, tonight's the night that we resume the tour. We're back in Reedland tonight, and tickets are still for sale on faithandfourletterwords.com. They will be for sale all the way up until showtime, but a lot of people are nice and will say, well, hey, we want to come, but can we pay at the door? Unfortunately, no. You have to buy the ticket online because we do a cashless, no money at the door system where you pay Eventbrite, which is the third-party vendor that populates our tickets. And when you go on Eventbrite, it lists the upcoming shows. You click on that link and you can buy a single or more tickets. And then the way that we do it is when you come to the show, you will be seated first come, first serve. So there aren't reserved seats. And then we take the stage from 6 to 8 and we get you out of there pretty much on time, right at 8 o'clock. We also open it up for questions and we like to engage a lot with the audience. So thank you for those of you who are coming tonight or who are repeats. We love to see people in person and we've missed that. And Amanda and I haven't even been together to do the digital streaming in the last week and a half. So we're excited to be back together in person for our next Faith and Four Letter Word stop, a third time coming back to Reedland, Iowa, the home of Grump Days, where they have a lot of nice and very engaged people when it comes to the Faith and Four Letter Words movement, if you will. So it's kind of a movement, which is sounds cheesy or cliche, but she and I were talking about it yesterday that, this whole thing of doing the shows, and it was born out of the podcast. And then when we started doing the in-person shows, we thought it would be like maybe one or two shows. And that was back in 2023. And here we are, 2026, still rolling along. And we have shows scheduled all the way through the end of this year. So people have been asking me, when are you going to be back close to this town? Or when are you going to be back in, my neck of the woods? And we will have some new show locations forthcoming that we will announce as they get closer. So right now, Reedland, you're on deck, and we are excited to see you tonight. Another exciting development that I can't wait to share more about in the coming weeks is a new book that will be coming out, and it's one of the biggest, I think, labors of love type projects of my life. And so I'm so excited to share more about that. That's a little tease of what's to come here in the next couple of weeks. And then I also just wanted to update everybody on how much we appreciate the sponsorships. So if you or someone you know has a business and would love to partner with us, collab with us, as the kids say, we take sponsors for the group chat, which is this digital streaming show. So every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 7, Amanda and I, or myself or her soloing, will join you live on Facebook and then our YouTube channel. So it's a multi-stream, as they call it. And we have had the unique opportunity of a marketing firm out of Des Moines to seek out sponsors who believe in empowering women and who wanted to back the group chat and our sort of mission and vision here with Faith in 4-Letter Words. So Canoyer Garden Center and Glass House Market, it's an incredible space that sells all the things you need to decorate your home on its exterior and interior if you want to bring plants indoors for the season right now, spring and summer, when everything's in full bloom. So that Canoyer Garden Center and Glass House Market in Grimes and Ankeny, they have tons of specials every weekend as they head into, their busiest time of year. So we appreciate the support. And then we have to mention this Emsella chair, which is this new technique to help women who have bladder issues post childbirth primarily. And it's supposedly, the chair is like simulating 1,000 Kegel exercises. So it's an incredible breakthrough. And that's courtesy of the Urology Center of Iowa. So you can check out that women-focused practice if you go to iowauro.com. So thank you for letting me interrupt your regular programming for that sponsor identification. I am going to pull up the stream and see if we have any questions or comments that I can share. If you've been following the news, then you have probably heard about another crazy attempt to wreak havoc. And that was on Sunday night for the 250th anniversary of our country, which of course is this year. The White House and President Trump partnered with UFC, which is the fighting arm or organization of sort of that mixed martial arts and what has become a very popular sport, both, countrywide, but internationally. So he partnered with Dana White, who is the head of that organization. And I want to say Dana White said they spent like $60 million to put that octagon on the White House lawn. And then they had, quite a spectacle where they did a military flyover, and then they had some pseudo celebrities and dignitaries. But then of course they had all the fighters doing their walkout songs coming out of the White House. And the whole thing was very interesting. It's very much a reflection, I think, of President Trump being somebody who came out of that world of television entertainment and really sensationalism, right? When he had his show where he was like, "You're fired." And so he's very much kind of that TV caricature. And so that has now been, in some respects, applied to his administration currently because of his ability to do something on a grandiose scale by partnering with Dana White. And if you have been following in the last 24 hours, some of the fallout from that, it turns out there was a kid and his friends, I believe in Ohio, where they had planned to fly drones over said White House UFC spectacle and try to kill people by shooting them or blowing them up through drone activated sort of military engagement. So the whole thing is crazy, but that is the future, I think, for a lot of people, good or bad actors when it comes to military strikes, is using drones. And so it is crazy to think about how a drone could be used as a weapon of mass destruction. And we've seen these. Many of you have probably walked outside and said, "What's that? Is that a bird?" And recognized there was like a drone, flying overhead, and you're supposed to have a license for it and it's supposed to be regulated. Well, like anything else, people find ways to abuse what could be a good thing. So it was crazy to think about if something had happened where they had been able to successfully fly a drone over in that airspace. I mean, it could have been catastrophic. So very scary to think that people, in this case, another young person, was trying to mastermind and execute a plot to assassinate the president and wreak havoc on a very highly publicized, high profile event. So it was interesting because they were saying, in this case, the mom did the right thing, because a lot of people don't realize much of this conversation, the plotting, the planning. Of course, it was probably reflected on this kid's digital footprint. So basically reminding adults, kids of any age, if you have access to their devices or you're a part of paying for said devices, then you need to be mindful of what are they talking about, what are they doing, knowing that there are a lot of kids that are going down a wayward path, especially if they're plotting to assassinate a president. I mean, it sounds like something out of that Matthew Broderick movie, War Games. Remember that? Or Red Dawn. Those of us from the 90s love and remember Red Dawn. A lot of friends, familiar faces, are joining the stream this morning. Dana, Mary, Patrice, Monique, my friend Jenny, Ray Beckman, good morning, and love Ray. And my dog groomer, Jill, is on. The dogs are happy. We'll be happy to see you soon, Jill. And then Gwen Westendorf, she is a friend, a close friend of mine, Julie, from high school. Her mom, Gwen and Chuck, wonderful, supportive lady who's been so supportive of my mom walking through widowhood. And so I appreciated the opportunity when I was home for my high school's banquet a couple weekends ago to be able to see Gwen and her husband, Chuck, and to touch base in person with them. Just a great family. And it was really cool because when we talked, she said, "Hey, I need to watch your show." And that's what's fun about live streaming and the technology and how things have evolved. You can have people anywhere in the country joining you for a live broadcast, and I'm in my son's old bedroom, which is now our podcast studio, being able to stream all over the world, really, if somebody wanted to jump on our Facebook page or YouTube. We have Angie from, my Canoyer flowers are looking amazing this year. Angie gave us a shout out, or gave Canoyer a shout out. Thank you for sharing that, because the pictures that they share on Facebook and all that they offer at that garden center look amazing. So thank you for affirming that. Whitney said, "Looking forward to seeing you both in Monticello." So Whitney doesn't know this, and I have to make this announcement now. We are going to move the Monticello show, Whitney. So I will be reaching out to talk to you about that. And it's something that there's a schedule conflict that has arisen. And so we need to talk to you about that. So let's connect after the live stream this morning and plan an alternative date. And so we're also looking to reschedule the Fireside Winery show at Marengo. So a couple schedule changes. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, with having children and jobs and life, things happen and we have to make adjustments. And so if you are somebody who, like us, is a mom with children and all the responsibilities, then we always feel like we have all the balls in the air and we're just juggling and hoping none drops, or you feel like you're the performer with the the plates, and you've got all you're balancing all your plates, and you're hoping none falls and crashes to the ground. So that's how a lot of us feel a lot of the time. And that's really any stage that you're at with children, because you have all the challenges when they're young, and then when they get older, it's all the socializing and all the things they do, and then they have their driver's license. And so, of course, in Iowa, that starts very young. Our son is older in his class. He's a late summer birthday. So he was already 14 and a half when he graduated eighth grade. And in Iowa, you can get a permit to drive when you're 14. So from the day our son graduated eighth grade, he has always had a driver's license. And interestingly, in the last few months, he did not unlike his grandmother, his grandfather, and his mom, who can have a lead foot. He did get a ticket where he was going, I think, like 10 over. Well, in Iowa, when you're 17 and you have a graduated driver's license, if you get a ticket or infraction for speeding, you can get your license suspended for a couple months. But the way you can avoid the suspension is taking an online course that both Iowa and Illinois offer, and it's called Alive at 25. It's a 4-hour virtual course where you have to be on camera and you have to answer questions and engage, and you can't shut the camera off. So, I mean, you're very much a part of the class, and it's interactive. So yesterday, my son Thomas had to do this 4-hour Alive at 25 class, so thereby avoiding getting his license suspended. And so it's a nice opportunity to reinforce to people the importance of not speeding and following the rules of the road kind of thing. So it's like a refresher course. So what's funny is my nephew in Illinois also has to do the same class because he's 16 and got a speeding ticket. So my sister and I were laughing, saying, what if they were both on the same class? So what was really interesting is I talked to Thomas about it. There were 15 people at least in the class. So picture the grid, right, of faces on Zoom. And each person had to say their name and why they were in the class. So my son had to say, Thomas, speeding. Well, one person in the class, and I said, was it mostly young people? And he said, no, there were some older people, but one person said they were in the class because they fell asleep behind the wheel. And my son said, I can't believe they even admitted that. So crazy turn of events that led to that person being in the Alive at 25 class, and definitely not good if you're falling asleep behind the wheel. So I have no idea what the circumstances were, but I'm prayerful that that person did not get injured or did not injure somebody else, because that's actually crazy. If you wake up and you caused a collision or did something that was, serious, because you then recognized, oh my gosh, I fell asleep. I think we've all been there where you have so much on your mind, or you're so used to driving the same route, like to and from work, that you just zone out while you're driving, and then you'll get to wherever you're going and you'll think, I don't even remember how I got here because I was completely zoned out, in space while I was driving, lost in my thoughts. The funny thing is, since we're such creatures of habit, I remember for years driving the same route back and forth to the TV station where I worked. And I would now sometimes, when driving, and I left there in 2013, but I remember sometimes in the last year, I would start to drive toward my old job, and you're just like autopilot, right? And all of a sudden I'd be like, oh no, I'm not going to the TV station. I'm in my 50s now, and I haven't been there since I was 40. It's just very funny, very weird. So also in the news, of course, is all the ongoing conflict with the Middle East and how that has impacted our oil prices. So I was pleasantly surprised yesterday. For those of you in other states, you will not be able to relate to this because you definitely have higher gas prices than us. But in the last week, our gas prices in Iowa have dropped dramatically. And part of that, too, I should qualify it, our state subsidizes ethanol because we are such a corn-rich, corn-producing, thereby ethanol-producing state. So we get subsidies for our gas that make the higher grade, the 88 blend, much cheaper for unleaded. And then we also do not have the high gas taxes tagged on to our per gallon prices. And so the reason that I share that is because this will be of interest to some of you that are not hyper local, that are not Iowans. So yesterday, for unleaded 88, I paid $3.32 a gallon to fill up my daughter's Jeep, which I thought was a very welcome sight at the pump because we were well into the upper $3 into the low 4 range at one point. So I texted my friends right away, two of whom are in Pennsylvania, one who's in New York, and I said, "Yay, dropped again," because we were down to 320 or 332 a gallon. And they texted back right away. And this friend, Lori, she's in Washington, Pennsylvania, which is not far from Pittsburgh. That's where her sister Gina also lives. And Gina is one of my best friends from college. So $4.29, she said, was the closest to her, the cheapest close to her. So, I mean, they're almost $1 a gallon higher. And for those of you who are regular gas pump people, where you fill up your car, or from talking to your spouse or your kids how expensive gas is. I mean, I remember in 1995 when I first had a job in television in Iowa, that gas at that time in Iowa was 99 cents a gallon. So the story goes, and it's crazy to think about, my Honda Civic, I could fill that Honda Civic up for $16, and it lasted me easily 3 weeks. So can you imagine if you could drive right now in 2026 for 3 weeks with your vehicle only needing $16 worth of gas? Now, I was also only making minimum wage as a reporter, fill in anchor. So I was making $4.65 an hour. So $16 was relative to my pay rate, which means that wasn't necessarily cheap because I was like just above the poverty line. But for those of you who have those stories of being young and broke and, making your way in the world, then you'll also agree with me that no matter how little we made, some of those years were some of the happiest years of our life. And you were very content because you didn't know what you were missing, right? And it's always true. It's like more money, more problems. So you make more money because you get a promotion, but now you have more headaches because maybe you're a supervisor, or now you're the manager and you have all the stresses that you didn't have when you were just the employee. So, I mean, everything in life is a trade-off. And I just remember I was talking to Amanda about this. We've said this many times. When she was just starting out in her television career, and she was in Amarillo, Texas, which is a great town, by the way. She loved her time there. You end up having all the limitations of being young and underpaid. And in this case, she had just started dating Hector, aka Mr. Telemundo, who was working for Telemundo at the same TV station where she was the anchor in Amarillo. And she said, she would get done with the news and she would come back to her apartment, and then she and Hector would like have steaks, and he would play music that, he loved from his life growing up originally in Argentina. So it was just a special time for them when they were young and just, starting to date and all the things. And then I always talk about how when I first met my now husband, and I was actually 24, and he was already well into his 30s, being older than me, he was divorced and had a duplex. Some people here like to call it a twin home. It's kind of the 90s term is duplex, where you have a conjoined property that mirrors one on the other. And so he had one side of it, and it was a duplex that he and his dad had paid to build. And then they rented out the other side of it, which was a smart move for somebody who was a single dad and who was at that time obviously paying child support for many years. So when I met him and he lived in that duplex, I initially dated him for quite some time, and he was always in that duplex. And we dated for years, and then we're long distance, like 2.5 years when I moved here before he followed me to Iowa. But looking back, I just think I was making, oh gosh, I don't know. I was making maybe 26,000 a year at my peak, or 28,000, I think, before I left Yakima and the TV stations there. And he was a teacher and he was divorced. And so he was, still supporting his kids. But it was just a special time where we have such fond memories of being together when we were both very much on the lower income, side of the fence. Now he did a lot of driver's ed and he coached and he made really good money. I mean, he made like $30 an hour doing driver's ed back in the 1900s. So that was a big deal back then to make that much hourly. And we were happy. We were so happy, right? Because you don't need the big house or the nice cars or all the keeping up with the Joneses to be happy. If you have genuine love and relational support, that's what fills your bucket and that's what makes you happy. Now, granted, there can be a lot of stresses though that come with not being able to keep the lights on or pay your bills. So not trying to minimize the challenges that come with all the things, job loss and everything that we've all been dealing with at different points in our lives. But isn't it wonderful when you recognize that it's not the material things that are needed to cement your happiness and your contented life? And so I think back, I can remember we talk about this all the time. And those of you who have been Pizza Hut fans for life, as a lot of us are, will relate. We remember when back in 1998 is when I first met Dave. And I can remember when to get a Pizza Hut pizza, a large, order it and deliver it to your house, it was easily like $20. And we talk about how, isn't it weird that like the price of pizza is now the same or cheaper than it was in the 1900s, which is crazy, right? Because now you can get like 2 larges for like $14.99 plus tip and delivery fee and all the things. But I mean, back in 1998, I remember when it was either 99 or 98 and they debuted the New Yorker. And that was like a big deal because I'm a sugar addict. I've weaned myself off of it somewhat in my later years, but I loved the New Yorker because the sauce was sweet. And so when Pizza Hut debuted that, and now they tried to bring it back, and my husband and I both agree it's not as good as what it used to be for some reason. You know how you like, they try to recreate something from the past and you're like, it just hits different when you're older. It's not the same as when the New Yorker first came out, that pizza. So I just remember that was like a big deal. And Amanda talks about she and her dad, they would go to Blockbuster on Friday night and, go to Pizza Hut or get a pizza to go. And that was like a luxury. That was like a big deal. And now kids today, not all, but a lot of kids, they're so spoiled by all of the things that were privileges to us. So with like delivery, because of DoorDash and COVID and how everything changed, it's like nothing for them to like, when my son and my nephew were just together recently at my mom's condo in Peoria, they like DoorDashed Wingstop because it's like nothing for kids to enjoy what would have been, a luxury years ago to a lot of us, the Gen Xers. We would have said, oh my gosh, we can't afford to have food delivered. So, I mean, we're going to do carry out. Or if the pizza person did come, that was not a regular occurrence where you had people delivering food. And now it's like so commonplace that you go into any restaurant and you're like competing. If they have counter service, you're like competing with all the DoorDash drivers to get the food. And it was so funny. Speaking of counters, the other day I drove with my son past Papa Murphy's and I thought it was on Sunday and I had gone with Thomas to a couple graduation parties and my husband had been home doing yard work all afternoon. And so I thought, well, I'll grab him a Papa Murphy's pizza because he likes to do the take and bake sometimes when he's, especially like on a Sunday. And in this case, I knew he would want to watch some of the UFC fights. So I go into Papa Murphy's, and this was so funny. There was a man who was coming out of Papa Murphy's, and he was wearing like swim trunks and no shirt. And he wasn't, some young, like active teenager. Let's put it that way. He was a little older. And I paused and I thought, okay, again, this is what it's come to, where now everybody is so casual and the pendulum has swung so far that it's like, what a contrast to the Friday nights growing up where my mom, dad, and I, before my sister was born, would go to Bishop's Buffet in downtown Peoria, Illinois, where they had the little crinkly decorative toothpicks in the perfectly cut cheese wedges. And there were fountains and lighted statues on platforms and velvet curtains that were all part of the decor. I mean, it was like an upscale dining experience at Bishop's Buffet back in those 70s and 80s in downtown Peoria. And I just think, and this is what we've evolved to in our country and our culture, where now I'm going into an establishment where they have health codes and they're trying to, serve up clean and not contaminated food. And yet there's people who don't even wear a shirt when they come in to pick up their pizza. So that's how much we've devolved as a culture, where we are just so casual. And I get a lot of pushback from people when I say this, and my age is showing. I believe that if you are an educator, if you are a professional, that you have to have some level of attire that reflects your position to garner respect. And people say, no, everybody should be comfortable and casual, and teachers should be allowed to wear Crocs, and we should have everybody wearing sweats, and it should be like pajama pants all around. And I always go back to this example, which annoys people when I've given it, I'm sure, because I used to do presentations sometimes for the schools where I would talk to new teachers and I would explain that you definitely want to set yourself apart from the students. You don't want to look like a kid. So you shouldn't be dressing like you just, came out of your college laundry room doing, carrying your basket. You should have some level of attire that reflects now you have a college degree or you're in a position of authority. And when people push back and say, no, it should be casual and comfortable, then I always say, let's go back to 9/11. So 9/11, formative time in all of our lives, or very, infamous time, a sad time to go through something so horrific, but it just imprinted on your mind the memory of when you saw the coverage on TV or when you first heard about it. Okay, if you go back to that year in 2001 and you think about when Katie Couric was doing the morning show with Bryant Gumbel and Matt Lauer, all the news personalities, all the news anchors at that time, they were covering the 9/11 tragedy. Wall-to-wall coverage is what we called it, 24/7 coverage. If you turned on the Today Show and Katie Couric were wearing a warm-up suit, a Lululemon warm-up, I'll throw in a name brand. Lululemon didn't exist back then, but let's say she was wearing a Lululemon warm-up, right? Like she just came from the gym. Then you turn on ABC and Diane Sawyer is on and she's wearing a blazer and a blouse. Tell me if you put the TV on mute and you watch both of them and you had a split screen. So you got Katie with her sweats and Diane with her blazer, and you're watching both of them with no sound. Tell me by default, if you surveyed 100 people on the street, which of the two would be perceived as more credible and professional? And you and I both know that 100% unequivocally, it would be Diane wearing the blazer. And that's because perception is reality. And so when you are doing the news or you're in a position of authority and you want to garner respect and to be taken seriously, you cannot dismiss, disconnect, or escape the connection to how you present yourself as being a driver of the assumptions that are made about you before you even open your mouth. So the reason I share that example is because so many people today, especially young people, don't see that correlation. And so if you have somebody that tells you when you are going to a family dinner or sadly like a funeral or a church outing and you're the grandma and you're saying, now, you shouldn't be wearing those jeans or your sweats to this event. And then the kids are going to say, but grandma, we can wear these to school and I can wear whatever I want. And this is what, and I don't have any dress clothes. I don't want to dress up. Then you hit them with that example. You say, now listen, let's talk about when you watch the news and would you take the person more seriously? Now they may be so young and defiant that they won't get the connection. But if they're being honest, I think my children would grasp that concept of you have a correlation immediately tied to appearance that is a judgment call that we all make, whether we recognize it or not. So it's almost like that subconscious judgment. So similarly, and those of you who have experienced this can relate. Similarly, I've had people say that they've gone to school events, like a concert, like a vocal music concert or a band concert, and they've been shocked when they see how some of the kids dress. So a lot of it is like the dresses on the girls are really short, or they just have more revealing attire. And then that's more just a reflection of what the culture is now allowing, is so permissive about. I mean, young people, especially with like homecoming and prom, they wear these dresses and shoes that when I was growing up, that would have been like only something you would see on a stripper or a prostitute, right? That's how much our clothing has evolved to bring some of what used to be like that stripper culture to like mainstream America. And I'm talking like the shoes, you've seen them. And then of course the dresses. So like with prom, it's tough because if your daughter wants to dress modest, or if you're somebody who doesn't want your kid to have all of the, revealing swimsuits and prom dresses, I mean, it can be really, really tough. And especially different sized kids, because Amanda and I talk about it back in the 90s, we were wearing the low cut jeans and the crop tops. And the way that these fashions all come around again, now you see that is back, or you see people wearing, all of the cutout revealing clothes. And then you just think, oh my gosh, some of those poor kids who, just don't feel comfortable with their bodies, let alone when they're trying to then keep up with the fashions. And the fashions are not necessarily flattering on some people. So it's a challenge. Okay, Amy Shannon, I remember bawling my eyes out one summer as we were leaving in a family camping vacation. Gas was $1.89 a gallon. Wow. Yeah, I know. Isn't it weird how you remember that? So imagine if you went to the pump right now and you saw that and you'd be like, oh my gosh, I have all this extra money, because we do have to spend so much of our income on the things that years ago you'd have such a minimal expense that you had a lot more money left over for all the other things in life that you'd like to spend it on. So it's crazy how now everything is so much more expensive, and perhaps most of our incomes have not kept up with that rate of inflation. I mean, that's a fact, right? I don't think that's just anecdotal. I love that Angie said, now I'm craving Bishop's chocolate pie. There was something so special about walking through that Bishop's line and then coming to that dessert area in Peoria. They had the cheese wedge and they would cut them into triangles, and they had the scalloped edges because they were using the tools that made the cheese triangle, scalloped edges with a toothpick with the what do you call it? The little garnish on top, the frill on top of the toothpick. So it was a different time. And then you would see those individual pie slices all set out so perfectly on the little, white saucer. And they could do those chocolate shavings on top of that thick layer of that foamy, almost incredibly tasting whipped cream, and they would just put those chocolate shavings just so gently atop the chocolate pie. I mean, it just was like, as a kid, you never forget that, moment of like, "Oh, now I get to pick out my dessert." And then I would always get my cheese wedge. Now in Peoria, we also, at the end of the buffet, they had an area where it was like this, and I remember it like it was yesterday. It was like a metal cage that was painted and the top was open. And in said metal cage, they had individual balloons that had been blown up, not with helium, blown up, and then a flat piece of paper that said Bishop's Buffet on it, like a little foot, was was attached to where you tie the balloon. And so you could sit the feet, the little placard down, and then the balloon would sit flat on your table. Well, I always wanted to get a balloon. And then we would walk to downtown in Peoria where they had, the riverfront. So there would be like ducks or wherever, you might go to this like post meal nature walk. And I wanted to throw my balloon into the river to be with the ducks. Who knows? And this was back before everybody freaked out and said the birds are going to choke on balloons. And so we were doing things, admittedly, that now aren't environmentally sound. And my mom said I cried because I had thrown my balloon in and couldn't get it back, which is the typical kid move. And I would have been really young because my sister is 5 years younger. So she was born in 78. And so this would have been between 73 and 78 before she was born, because when I used to go to Bishop's with my parents on Friday night, I didn't have a sibling yet. So what a time to be an only child and to get to look forward to a chocolate pie slice. French silk pie is what they also call it at Bishop's. It was a wonderful childhood for those of you like me who lived it. Thank you for watching the group chat. If you're joining us late, then you haven't heard Amanda had a work commitment. So on top of all of the crazy with soccer, she had a federal jury duty stint on Monday. She has a work commitment today. And then on Friday and the following Monday, we have more upheaval. I will be traveling. And so she's going to solo and do the honors Friday and Monday. So thanks for sticking with me and letting me ramble on, even if you're sick of me and miss Amanda. She'll be back. We'll be back together soon. Okay, we've got Anne watching, Chris, Melinda, Marcella. Thank you all for joining us. I just really appreciate spending time with you as I go it alone on this Wednesday morning. If you haven't been outside, or if you haven't been somewhere where you can hear the patter on your windows, if you're in Eastern Iowa right now, it's been raining all morning. And so that's good news for those of you who maybe didn't want to go out and water your plants or your pots today. And good news for the baseball schedule that we don't have a game today. So we had a doubleheader Monday against Dubuque Senior. The second game had to be cut short because a fuse blew and we couldn't get the lights to come on at the ball field. So now that second game has to be rescheduled. And then 2 weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, it's all a blur, the Waverly West game was rained out. So they're rescheduling that to next week. And then we had last night our second matchup of the season of East-West, which was a lot of fun. Love a lot of people from East, and always a pleasure to see them, and my son's friends with some of the players. And then tomorrow night we play Davenport Central. So a team from the Quad Cities will be coming up here for what will be the fourth game of the week. And then if you live in Waterloo, and in my case as a current city employee, we have Friday off for Juneteenth. And so Juneteenth is a very now popular holiday or celebration that a lot of communities mark and do events around. And it was actually really troubling. And I will share this because some of you will be appalled to hear this. So just to, I guess, educate all of us on something that many people would say is common knowledge, but I get that, everybody has different life experience and different cultural awareness. And so for some of you watching, you might say, well, what is Juneteenth? What does that even mean? Or why would it be a city holiday? And so what I will tell you is, it's an interesting story. Juneteenth is actually the reflection of the month of June and the 19th. So Juneteenth being June 19th, it was born out of that date. So it is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the end of slavery in the United States. So this is the backstory. It marks the day in 1865 when federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas to ensure all enslaved people were freed more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. So imagine back in the 1800s when they were not, we were dealing with like the Pony Express, they were not aware of the Emancipation Proclamation that effectively freed all the slaves because news or word had not spread. And of course, if they were a part of a slave owner situation, horrible, of course, some of those Galveston slave owners or other pockets of slavery across the country weren't like excited to tell the slaves, guess what? Now you can, finally be free. You're no longer a part of this bondage and forced labor. So when that news, 2 years delayed, reached the slaves in Galveston, Texas, understandably, born out of that delayed happiness and delayed freedom comes this celebration that we now know as Juneteenth. So that said, in communities like Waterloo, Iowa, where there is a significant African American population, it makes sense that people would embrace the concept of commemorating it and marking the occasion with celebrations. So in Waterloo, they have a festival and they do a lot of really cool things where they do performances and they recognize people in the community that are being advocates and voices for civil rights and working to stop discrimination, all the things. So it's a really cool thing to commemorate. And then bonus, if you're a city employee in Waterloo, they consider Juneteenth to be a city paid holiday. So this is the sad part of this story that I wanted to share. So one of my friends, LaTanya Graves, who's heavily involved in the NAACP here in Waterloo, she posted yesterday on Facebook that despite the disparaging comments on the page, they were going to still move forward with the celebration. And so I thought, well, what is she talking about? So of course it piqued my interest. So I went and looked on the Waterloo Juneteenth celebration Facebook page that had been created to share the dates, the details, and all the activities planned for the celebration. And troll accounts, people making, fake accounts or using fake names, one can assume. Sometimes people don't hide behind their keyboard, but in this case, who knows? I didn't recognize the names, thankfully. But there were comments on that page that were just despicable. Something about a reference to monkeys or something. I mean, and I just thought, this is just so sad that in 2026, because of how social media has brought out the worst in some people, and because, again, you can be anonymous on social media, it just is so sickening to think that people have no problem jumping on and like pulling their head out of 1950, like, we're back in the days where there's going to be separate drinking fountains. I mean, it's just a bizarre thing to witness, and it's also disheartening. And then I'm white, and so then I think about, well, it's not impacting me nearly even a fraction of what it would a person of color. And it makes me sad because, wow, you should never have to go through that, but especially not when people come to your doorstep on your page when you're sharing something that's celebratory. So shame on us as a culture when we are raising and then allowing and being permissive around these individuals that not only are ignorant, but they're so offensive to so many people that they make you not have a lot of hope and positivity around our country and relationships and just common decency and respect, right? Moving forward. And then I think of the people I know and love that are in my family or your family that are of a different race than, that aren't white, and the experiences that they have to go through. And then you just, to walk a day in somebody's shoes is not something that many of us will ever understand. So try to extend that empathy, because it's something that you can't relate to, but you can appreciate how unfair it is when people are having to not only be targeted because of it, but then to have the fear of like, oh, and I don't want my kids to go through that, or I don't want my kids to go through that. And so you would think, as a generation ages into the older years, that maybe we're beyond some of that. And then you open the Facebook page for Juneteenth and think otherwise. So tough to read, and just so sad on so many levels. So I just wanted to share that, because there may be somebody this week who you run into, and maybe they say, hey, I'm going to a Juneteenth celebration, or you might see something on social media or a sign. And now that I've talked about it, maybe your phone will pick up my voice and serve you up something about it. But now 1865, Galveston, Texas. So when word finally was reached to those slaves there that they were free, from that incredibly important moment in history comes the modern day Juneteenth celebrations. And the more you know, right? That's the PSA tagline that they use on ABC, the more you know. Okay, so Amanda just texted me, and she said she wanted to remind me that we need to bring our own mics tonight in Reedland. I will grab the mic and the portable speaker before I leave. So if you are a fan of, as we all are, right, most of us probably watching television, then you know that there are a lot of great series that are out there on all the streaming. Now, there is a documentary that my mom and sister were texting about yesterday, and I have yet to watch it or dive into it, but I wanted to ask anybody if they, and it's not a documentary. I take that back. It's a psychological thriller starring Jessica Chastain and Anne Hathaway as best friends and neighbors in the 1960s, whose idyllic lives unravel after a tragic accident involving their sons, leading to guilt, suspicion, and paranoia. It is a movie that is a remake of a French film, and it's called Mother's Instinct. So I wanted to share that because it's a new movie that my sister and my mom said is crazy. And so this actually came out in 2024, but right now it appears that it's gaining popularity. You can watch it on Hulu and some of the other streaming services. So it's called Mother's Instinct. So if you need a psychological thriller to watch on this rainy day, or if you are looking for an entertaining movie, my mom and my sister would say that this is worth your time, with Jessica Chastain and Anne Hathaway. So two good actresses. Now, Rotten Tomatoes only gave it a score of 50. It's a 55% Rotten Tomatoes. And my son is such a film snob that if it's not like 80s or higher for Rotten Tomatoes, he usually doesn't think it's worth his time. So he's like, Siskel and Ebert, to date myself. They were the film critics that had a show based out of Chicago for years, and they would do movie reviews, and they would have these scathing critiques of some of the films, and they were very rude. But back then, I say very rude because back then people still had some level of common courtesy. Now they would probably be tame compared to what we've seen, with people like Simon Cowell, where they just, rip people to shreds. So Amanda said she basically drove through tornado-like weather to get to Mason City this morning. And I can relate, right? Because like I said, it's been crazy with the severe weather. So the last week, twice I had to go through torrential rain where it was like a fire hose was being shot at my windshield. I mean, that's how intense the rain was. So it's already 9 after the hour. I more than made up for my 5-minute late arrival. And I have a Bible verse to share with you before you head out on this somewhat dreary, rainy day. It's from Micah chapter 6, verse 8. Know, O people, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And there is a popular Christian song that paraphrases this verse, and the last three components of it: do what is right, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. What great elements, or a great mantra to live by, right? If you can check off all three of those things and do the best you can in your day, I feel like you have a lot to be proud of. So thank you for sharing your morning with me. I'm Tara Thomas. This is the group chat. We love spending time with you. We're excited to see you tonight in Reedland. Make it a great Wednesday. And Amanda will be joining you on Friday as she solos our next episode. Take care.
Thank you for watching the group chat. The show is brought to you by the empowering staff at Urology Center of Iowa, Senoyer Gardens, Azalea Lane Boutique, and Splendor the Medical Spa.